I think the most valuable thing that you cannot steal in real estate or not copy is your network, right? And that's because that's built through relationships and trust over a period of time. But I would say you can buy that network. What is going on, guys? Welcome to today's episode of the Collecting Keys Real Estate Investing Podcast. Today is Wednesday. It's the Off Market Operator Radio Show. And I am Mike DeHaan here with my co-host Dan Austin and new daddy Dylan Cook.
What's up, Dylan?
So Dylan is back this week. New kiddo about a week ago. We had Cody on last week, if you guys caught that one. But dude, how's it feel? You taking to dad life wonderfully in the first week?
It's all things considered going pretty good. Everyone's like, you'll get used to the lack of sleep. So I'm still waiting for the get used to part, but
you don't look that tired yet, so it's not hitting you that hard. Although it did take you about 3 minutes to figure out your headphones weren't plugged in.
See, that's my excuse. It's the brain fog and waking up every 3 hours. But other than that, man, it's been good. And I know we talked about previously, I think I hired my assistant, I think at one of the better times because we still had some work getting done these past, 10 days, even with the delivery and whatnot. So that was good.
Nice. That's awesome. But sweet. And so I guess 1 week old?
Yeah, 10 days. As you're born on the 14th, and rocking and rolling now. Mom's checking out, baby's checking out. So, and then now it's just getting in bed routine and hopefully getting back to the business here shortly.
Sweet. And so, how do you balance that in that first week span?
There's no balancing the first week, I don't think. I mean, there's
shit done.
Yeah, you're taking care of the baby. You're taking care of your new mom, especially. My wife had to have a C-section, so that's a little bit more extensive. But when things come in through my phone, I was basically screenshot, send to Kayla, who's my new assistant, and like, hey, can you handle this, or send them a contact or two, and then it's just kind of taken care of from that way. And answering a text or a phone call in the hospital isn't too bad, but for example, like follow-up calls in the CRM, that's not happening, something like that. But some of the admin stuff or the flip stuff that we're doing can still get done.
Yeah. So theoretical situation, okay, baby is crowning. You see on your phone, I would like to sell my property tomorrow. What do you do? You have your Apple Watch.
I won't even know that notification came in.
No, you sound like your Apple Watch. Everyone's Apple Watch is always on. You're like,
it's an $80,000 wholesale fee.
Ooh.
Maybe if I was first starting, that'd be a different question.
You
but
could set
I'm
up
in a
your
position
child
now where it doesn't matter.
Think about with compound interest. If you put $80,000 into a Bitcoin for your daughter, how well off would she be?
Well, I'm going to do that anyway, so we'll find out.
Oh, fancy pants over here.
Already rich.
Yeah. Wow.
But no, it's okay. If you had been able to pay for her entire college because you signed a deal at the moment of her birth, she would have totally understood in the future.
Yep.
Probably.
Yeah. I get it.
But anyway,
how was the bed? How was the bed in the hospital?
Dude, it sucked. And we were there for like 3 or 4 nights.
Because you had the C-section. Awful. Yeah, dude, that's tough. That's tough duty right there.
That's like the most universal thing I think I've heard from all men that I know that have had kids is how terrible is the situation that's like in the hospital. But my thought is always, but what about the person who's, having birth?
They're expected to give birth, right? Like they're expected to be in pain, all that sort of stuff, right? Okay, I'll just share you my experience because I didn't read any books. I didn't do any research. And at the time, it wasn't viral on the internet for dudes to talk about how bad the bed was or the chair or whatever. Like now it seems like a very common thing. Maybe it's because I'm on the dad algorithm. But I literally showed up, went to the birthing center. We had this sweet room. Everything's good, set up. My wife pre-packed my snacks because she knows I would want some snacks and all that stuff. She's going through the thing, and then the minute that it's time to give birth, the nurse literally just says, "Come over here," and she hands me a leg, and I'm like, "What am I doing? Am I participating in my wife giving birth?" Like I literally thought I was an innocent bystander. It's not the case. You have to be there. I was holding a leg, I was doing the whole thing, and I was not trained to do that, and I was not expecting that.
Well, that's what you get for giving birth up in Idaho where they don't have women's health. So
this is in Washington, dude.
It was their first time, bro. They had no idea what was going on.
It was my first time. And they're like, yeah. And it was just as casual as can be. Like, that's how it was supposed to be.
That sounds better than 36 hours of labor, not being able to sleep on that fucking couch. And then it was a rough, 4 or 5 days, but we're through it now. I'm not complaining.
That's the hardest part. You just got through the hardest part.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Besides your daughter's first boyfriend.
Yeah. So how does, this new experience in the fatherhood, Dylan, change your view over investing and everything else? I know this is a common topic with real estate investors. I think this is honestly a pretty good conversation for the show around legacy, family wealth, what your actual investment strategy looks like probably changed. I don't know if you're thinking about this beforehand, or if I've also heard a lot of people say, well, the second my kid was born, my entire view on the world changed.
Yeah, I've heard that latter statement too. And I mean, for me, honestly, it didn't. And I don't think that's taking away from, the affection that you have for your daughter is probably already, still there. But I don't think my investment decisions will change all that much in the near future. Now I am doing like the whole cool story, and who knows if it's the best ROI or not, but we have a 6 unit that I'll probably, refi and quit claim over to her, and whatever, she'll have that responsibility. And hopefully, as she's growing up, we can take her to it. She can see it, help manage it when she gets to a certain age, that kind of stuff. As from a monetary perspective, I think we're going to be okay regardless. It's more, I don't want to have the quote unquote born on third base mentality for the offspring that we do.
We don't have baseball over here. I don't know what that means.
You're born with an unfair advantage because your parents are wealthy, essentially is what it comes down to. And because, my parents weren't wealthy, I wasn't wealthy. I've had to grow in everything we have them to this point. So how do you instill, the work ethic, the dedication, the delayed gratification it took to get to this point, and not just handing over and the properties and assets that you have at a certain age.
Yeah.
That's my biggest dilemma. Not, okay, we're going to be wealthy. That's how,
Sure. I mean, like it's such an interesting sort of concept I've always tried to figure out, right? Because there's obviously people that come from very wealthy families that do very well, whether they take over part of the family business, or, whether it's just them being motivated to go to school, whether that's nature and nurture, I don't know. But everyone knows those people, right, that have never really had to worry about anything, never even really had to get a real job, but just were able to jump into wherever they were pushed, and it turned out fine.
Yeah, but the whole legacy thing of I don't expect my daughter to take over the family portfolio one day, or her offspring to take over the family. I don't want this to be I'm setting this up for 4 or 5 generations, because history shows us that's just not the case. The Vanderbilts lose all of their wealth, the 3rd or 4th Vanderbilt or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's the old adage, right? Is that the first generation builds it, the second generation grows it, and the third generation destroys it. That's historically what you see.
And you're not going to know those people anyways, so who cares?
Exactly. Fuck them.
Yeah. And, so that from that aspect of it, you hear some guys in GoBundance say the whole legacy piece. And, I won't say it's not important, but it's definitely not super high up there in my hierarchy list, I guess.
One of the comments I made to my wife yesterday, it was totally not even talk. We weren't thinking about this topic at all, but it was something with the kids. And I was like, we're going to raise them in a soft environment. We should make it at least somewhat hard for them. Meaning that in the simple terms, it's that's Dan lingo for obviously we've worked our tails off to do well so that our kids can have opportunity, but I'm going to have to find opportunities for hardship, kind of create opportunity for hardship. And by hardship, I don't mean things that are going to decimate them, but learn how to work hard, give them the opportunity to fail. Right now, my daughter's in this groove. So I've done the same thing as you, Dylan, where both my kids have a house, they're student rentals, and Cole, my son, goes with me all the time, mostly because now at this point, I'm the old curmudgeon landlord, and he provides a soft touch to that. When I show up to these 19-year-old girls, and I'm like, why is this not working? When it was working last time, I told you not to shove shit down here. You know what I mean? So, but my daughter's at this, she used to go with me. Now she's like, I don't want to go. And what is the consequence for that? Obviously she's only 6, so I'm not creating consequences for her, but as she gets older, she doesn't want to participate, but her brother does. What is the lesson she needs to learn there? And she needs to pay for that labor, right? Someone's got to pay for it. If someone else is doing the work for you, you have to have some sort of hardship with that. So just creating those opportunities without being a total dick, and realizing that at some point in time, you're going to provide trauma, doing quotations, to your child, because everybody has that. They're like, man, my parents did this and I did not like it. And some people's is more stupid than other people, where some people are like, yeah, I grew up in a brothel because my mom was a crackhead. That's different trauma, right? But we all have our own trauma, right? Whatever that trauma is, it's trivial to some people, but you just recognize that at some point in time you're going to be you're going to be the trauma creator for your child.
Yeah. I think a lot of us look at it from a financial lens too. Like if I go back in time and I was like 19 years old, and I'm like, mom and dad, like I'm struggling financially, I need some money. They'd been like, good luck.
Yeah.
Like,
That
and
sounds
then,
tough.
yeah, that sucks. But if, we get to that 19 years from now, I would hope that, I'd be like, okay, do I give them money then or not? That's kind of like the dilemma or the thought process I'd have.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a slightly interesting view and take on this because I do come from a family that's pretty well off, right? And one of the things that's kind of weird about that is that I never talked with my parents about money or anything else. And even though my parents like drove like decent cars, they weren't like driving Ferraris or anything, but they would drive like an Audi, right? Instead of like the old random Suburban that like my friends had, or like we went to Europe when I was a kid, like several times. It was not an uncommon thing for us to do. But as far as they like, I don't know, treated me or presented our lives to most people, it was just like everybody else. I still had to scrub the baseboards for my weekend chores, right? Or like I still, went to public school, or like everything else.
Imagine you scrubbing baseboards right now, because I can't imagine you doing that in your own house.
Fuck no, dude. I pay people for that. but like, you know what I mean? Like I did a lot of
little
like,
Michael on the baseboards, scrubbing the baseboards. I get it. That's so
and the thing that's kind of interesting is I didn't even really understand like the full financial picture until I was in college. Right. And even like a little bit after that, like I still went and got a job and did all these other things. I paid for my own apartment. I did all that sort of stuff exactly the same. And so it comes
you weren't
down
expecting
to like
anything. That's I think
I wasn't expecting anything. Yeah. But the funny thing is though, is that I still definitely had like this, I don't know, personality or like, I don't know, aura, whatever, where I did not want to do what the normal path was. That's like a big reason that I ultimately burned out and left engineering. Cause like from day one, I knew that I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing. And I don't know why, because that was the expectation that was given to me. And something that I've regularly thought about is if I had been, I don't know, more exposed to kind of the fact that my parents had a successful business, they had money, and they had approached life a different way already, I bet you that I could be further along than I am now, because I would have discovered, I would say, like the opportunity that exists in the world earlier, instead of needing to like, go through this entire experience of like going to college, paying for all the shit, like being an engineer for 5 years and hating that. And then not discovering that I was not about that life until I was 28 years old. I bet you I could have discovered that at like 22.
Yeah.
Right.
To that
had
point,
an extra 5 years.
I've had, I think, similar, I guess, discoveries is the best way to put that. Because like growing up, small town USA, we were, my parents worked in factories our life. And it was like, basically your education is your ticket out from that.
Totally.
But it was never discussed of entrepreneurship, was never even like, we were taught to be good employees, not, and you, Mike, had a natural like sense of that. I did not. I was like very much, and I was a good employee. It wasn't until 24, 25 where I'm like that this other world even existed. And you almost have to untrain your mind of like, and that's actually probably even somewhat comes up the business today, because I don't feel as productive when I'm doing creative tasks versus when I'm just in the CRM making calls.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when I feel my most productive, but I might not necessarily be that way.
Totally.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, and I think there's such a huge nature nurture component to entrepreneurship in general. Right. And I think a lot of people, when they have found some success and they have kids, one of the things that you don't really know, right, is if somebody is not necessarily entrepreneurial and you expose them to financial security, or you kind of like, put them on third base or whatever you said, they're more inclined to just be like, well, peace, fuck, I don't have to do anything. Right. Versus if they're more entrepreneurially driven, they're going to be more inclined to like try and do something with it or make more of it. And that's hard, because I don't know at what age you start to like see that in people.
Yeah. Well, you think back to your personal experiences, like, I don't know that you can guarantee what you would have done had you not done certain things. Like if your parents exposed you a certain way to a different way, maybe your parents were like, man, if we let Michael go loose on this, he's kind of going to like do some crazy shit. Maybe we want him to like go and like learn how to like at least follow a leader first before he becomes a leader. You never know.
Well, I used to do stuff though that was very entrepreneurial as a kid. Like I remember something I would do is we would have like these like little academic awards or whatever where you could win, you know, like a pencil or like the little knickknacks or dumb stuff in elementary school. What I used to do, because I was relatively intelligent, I would win those regularly, and I would go to the dumb kids and they would like I want that, and I would say I'll sell you this for like a quarter, right? And I used to just
That's what I'm saying though. Maybe
You
your
said
parents
that
are
other
like,
kid up for failure. His parents think he's so fucking smart.
yeah.
I used to do that stuff like all the
Your
time.
parents said he needs to learn how to do this for good and not just evil first.
Hey, I was an opportunist. That's why I'm a
Yeah.
dirty wholesaler now, dude.
Exactly,
I just recognize the way to make money.
Recognize value, recognize a gap in the marketplace. Yeah. I think in general, the whole idea of like legacy building, and there's no right way to do it. You're probably going to fuck it up some way. And you should, personally, I don't think you should be worried about what 3 or 4 or 5 generations are saying about you, or if your name's on a building, you're something like that. I think people get really wrapped up in what they have. I don't know that I believe in the whole like die with zero motto or mentality. I never read the book, but I can kind of guess what it's about.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of people that have read it and thought it was great, but it's like, you know, I don't know if you guys are in the situation, like you're like, hey, if you have parents, you're like, I don't give a shit if you spend all your money. Like, I don't need it. I don't want it. Like, spend every penny you worked your ass off. Don't think about me when you're thinking about leaving something. I loved earning everything I've earned. I know where I'm at. I know what my capabilities are. Like, I don't need that. And that's not a disrespectful thing, but just enjoy it. Don't not enjoy it, because I'm watching your life and it's like, have fun as much as you want. It's your life. It's not my life.
You see this like dynamic play out in some probate cases though, of like families who got each other's throats for like what seems to be minimal amounts of money. And some of these
it ruins families.
Yeah.
Like, deaths can ruin families because of what the perceived transfer of wealth is, even if it's something like you're saying, Dylan, might be trivial.
Yeah. People take it personally too, right? Especially when there's like a bunch of kids and like, I can't believe you left it to Jimmy, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, come on, get over it. But I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. And some people are so different about it too. Like we see this a lot in GoBundance as well, where a lot of people, I would say, especially if they're religious or they have these sort of like larger family values, they really are more interested in like kind of like that longer term multi-generational legacy wealth. But us over here, I'm pretty sure we're all a bunch of heathens.
Well, spend it all at the casino, baby.
Yeah. I mean, tying that into maybe the next part of this conversation, we always hear like Hormozy and them talk about like think and strategize in decades, right? Especially for their businesses. And so it's hard to like take the concept of thinking for 20, 30 years from now and pulling that back and not spending that money. But Mike, I wanted to just ask you, and we touched on this in our Scale Community Slack channel, but you had that second meeting with the Hormozis, right? And I had a personal question that came up is like, did they talk anything about trying to quantify the intangible stuff, like actually putting numbers around what a brand is worth, or intellectual property if you're a certain kind of business with some certain software, something like that? I'll leave that open-ended for now, kind of let you take in, ask follow-up questions.
They didn't with any of our stuff because none of it's like inherently that complicated, right? Like I think like if you have things that have a very high barrier to entry, like software, right? Or like some kind of like manufacturing process that you figured out that's took you like 5 years to do, that sort of stuff, totally. But when it comes down to like a marketing and sales process and a financing process, which is very much like what real estate is at its core, they're just like, anyone with money can do what you do. You just got to get better at doing it and learn how to do it more efficiently. So there's not a huge amount of like enterprise value that they give to stuff like that in regards to real estate. I think the most valuable thing that you cannot steal in real estate or not copy is your network, right? And that's because that's built through relationships and trust over a period of time. But I would say you can buy that network if you have a big enough pocketbook.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think part of that still ties to branding though, like your network.
Yeah, I was going to say anything
not
around
necessarily like paid branding or public branding, but your brand as a person is what helps build a strong network.
Well, on that note, like, you know, if I were to send my painting contractor, like my painter, or like let's say my drywall guy to the other guy, I know the prices I get are going to be better than what he sent, like he gives somebody else, just with that relationship, right? So even if you give the same contact or resource, it might not be worth the same amount.
Totally, that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
And then I guess the follow-up question to that is, what about for like the scale part of that is like, I don't know, with that membership count, having 5,000 members versus 50,000 members. Like obviously that is, the 50,000 is more valuable, has more reach, but I guess I wouldn't know how to try to quantify that on how they view it as a private equity company.
Yeah. So like in terms of how they value the group, if it was like larger versus smaller?
More of, I guess, value the community as a whole. You know, like what is your enterprise
Sure.
value based on this? And I guess reverse engineering the math of you have this many paid members versus this many, like, you know, a larger amount paid members, and then
Totally.
the net that's able to cast.
Yeah. So the big thing that they look at, right, when it comes to any sort of like paid product, especially recurring stuff, is they'll look at the LTV to CAC, they call it, or the lifetime value to the customer acquisition cost. And if you have a group of 50,000 members, but your customer acquisition cost is, almost the same as your lifetime value, then it's not really worth anything.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Right. If you have a group of 20 people and your customer acquisition cost is $2,000 and your lifetime value is $50,000 for each one, that's a very, very valuable business. Right. And so when they look at a lot of their, like a lot of stuff they look at, it's kind of like a fancy way of saying what's your like return on ad spend. But like when it comes to like a real estate specific business, we don't typically have a recurring lifetime value of our sellers. We do with our buyers, right? And this is kind of like what we were talking about before the show. I think one of the things that's very hard to apply to real estate when it comes to like all of Alex Hormozi and acquisitions.com stuff is a lot of people in their business, especially if they're wholesalers, their main struggles are on the deal sourcing and getting contracts. And so people view that as like their product, when in reality your product is your buyers list, right? And just having good buyers that are actually willing to pay, because if you don't, you can't make money, right? And so that contract acquisition process is more of like your procurement of your products. And so I think when a lot of real estate people, they listen to Alex Hormozi's stuff, they try to like they try to apply it to the wrong part of the business, and realistically, if you look at like lifetime value or your cost, like get a good buyer or like to buy a house, right? If you're going to flip it, those are things that you can actually manipulate a little bit more, and that you can use a lot of their general principles to kind of like build out and processize and measure. But they, the loss leader component of that, whether or not how much they value, I don't know. I think when it comes to things like loss leaders, especially when it's stuff like that, they look at things with such a long time horizon that there's no such thing as like a loss leader, right? It's an investment. It's not like something that you're going to be carrying as a loss for like half a decade, 5 years. If you're carrying as a loss for like 3 months, they would just say like, that's just part of doing the business, right?
The loss leader thing is interesting because in the context that I think most people think of it is Amazon was okay with losing money for 5 years, and while they got up and created market share, which you really can't do that, in my opinion, in an off-market wholesale business. And so
if you're losing money,
you're just losing money. Yeah.
There's there's no other typical product. You don't, like, a loss leader would mean that you have another product that is leading
something else to sell.
You know what I mean? That's making money. Like for Amazon, AWS has been what makes Prime even doable, because AWS is a deca-billion-dollar revenue stream, and it's super easy for them to operate.
Yeah. I mean, and they're like so many of these massive companies, they can have stuff like that, but it's because their lifetime value is so huge. Right.
Yeah.
So for example,
I guess to be said though, like think about this, Mike, I guess, just in business in general, for anybody that's starting a business, like we've started some other adjacent businesses, like Simply Leads, for example. Like at what point is losing money every month as an off-market real estate person a loss versus an investment? Because that's where, if you're going to start up, if you're listening to this, you've never sent a marketing campaign, maybe you own some rental properties or whatever, you've been an investor, but not like a business owner. What does that look like as losing? How much, how often, what should you expect?
Actually, can I interject? Because this might be a good example. Sure. What the podcast, right? You guys don't take advertisers, or, so like, it costs money for you guys to run this. Could the podcast be viewed as a loss leader for the scale community that you guys have? Whereas, the podcast might quote unquote lose money every month, but if you get some new members from it, like that could generate some money.
It totally could. Honestly, too, a big thing is that the scale community for a while was a loss leader for our partnership program.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right, where we were standing up the stuff for people. Like scale as a whole has never turned a profit. Right, it has been a pipeline to basically fund the marketing acquisitions to get people into our partnership program, which we did for several years. And now, as we sort of start to move away from that a little bit, what's actually been very interesting for Dan and I is figuring out how to, I would say, like, change that around so that the scale community becomes a profitable enterprise, while
I'll say
also
this
still
too,
being
like,
able to deliver like the same product that people are getting, which because like when it comes to like this, it's so easy. I can see why people shill out and become like these
sellouts.
sellout people that are like affiliating everything and everything's all bullshit and like let's just get people in the door or whatever, because like the velocity of money is extremely high with high ticket sales, but if your churn is extremely high as well, I don't know. I don't really understand what the point of that is.
It's a balance too when you talk about like the community like that, because when Mike and I, we added up recently because we were kind of doing some forecasting, the amount of money we spend a month on this whole shtick. I'm not going to say it live, but it's a lot of money. It's more than most people would imagine.
It's like so stupid how much money we spend, honestly.
Like, it's a lot per month.
Yeah.
But like the thing that we with scale in the community, it was kind of more of a project for us to do. It wasn't like started intentionally to be like, let's be community operators. But the interesting thing is like, how do you operate like a community that's sustainable, but isn't like what Mike said, people just selling out and shilling bullshit? Because like we don't have affiliates within our group for shit we don't use. We use everything that we give our folks affiliates for at a high level. And otherwise,
there's only a handful. It's not like you're like there's. I can
Yeah.
speak from experience. It's only like a certain, very small amount of venues.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and then also too with the scale community, right? Or like having this kind of paid community where people are verified operators because they're paying a significant amount of money to be in there. It's a good, loss leader or like small profit center, right, for like our lending business, which we have made hundreds of thousands of dollars off of, mostly lending to scale members, to other buyers that we have sold deals to. We have sold deals around the country to people that are within that group and made hundreds of thousands of dollars off of that with connections that we might have not had previously.
And this is my whole point of the origination of the question is quantifying that, or trying to quantify that. Okay, it's like this branch created this amount of money, this branch created this. Is this a hard thing to wrap your head around?
Yeah,
it is. It really is. Yeah, like the podcast. I think you hit the nail on the head. If you just look at just the production of the podcast, it has been worth every penny that we've spent on it. Even though it's not even actually that much when you only look at production. I mean, it's more than most people are willing to spend. And there's big brands out there that don't spend what we do on the production, which surprises me because they're so cheap. Because most people look at podcasts as advertising revenue, which is like so stupid. It's not worth even doing that. But the brand it's built and the community it's allowed us to build has allowed us to monetize the different parts of our business, such as, like Mike just mentioned, the lending business and those things that we actually are able to take income and invest it back into essentially ourselves, which we can then make more money on. We're controlling every kind of aspect of it for ourselves on an investment side.
Well, also, I just think any business in general that has a community aspect to it, and this can be the same for everyone that has a real estate wholesaling and flipping business, right? I'd be willing to bet that most of you guys are in a market that has like someone that's kind of like one of the bigger companies in town that hosts a meetup.
Yeah.
What do you think that is, right? That is their version of like the local scale community, and they are using that as a source to find buyers and find opportunities for their business. They will always have an easier time selling deals than people that do not have that, right? And then when it comes to scale, like especially with our partnership program, where we're running that at like a really, really high volume, there was a lot more opportunity to like move products and stuff that were in there because we had this national brand. Like if we had tried to stand up in some market across the country and we didn't know anybody that was there, like outside of like the one partner, it was always going to be harder to do that versus having like this national presence. We have a bunch of people that are all connected within their own spider webs of whoever, and all of a sudden the world becomes so much smaller to get deals done. And the funny thing is, it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. A huge part of real estate that makes things valuable is your network, right? And
Mhm.
who all is in your sphere of influence. And any part of real estate kind of has that same challenge.
Wait.
Like back to the lending business in particular, we were talking about this before the show too. One of the other members, he posted this win in GoBundance Facebook about how he had just made $64,000 in a month with his lending business. And the most common comments underneath that were, what's your lead source for those loans? And I sent it to Dan and I was like, bro, we got to go more on the lending business. We already have the lead source. We have so many people that need loans from us. We just don't have enough
underwritten
money.
quality people, because otherwise we wouldn't let them in the community or do business with them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like that's the best kind of lead.
With that best kind of lead too is like from the people who are listening or just off market operators, your best deals or your best leads are referrals. They don't cost any money.
Absolutely. Every time.
100%.
Your return on ad spend is infinite.
Yeah.
Which goes again back to the branding part of the discussion that Dylan brought up earlier. Is your brand and via your network does actually make you more money than just being a guy. Like if you think you're gonna, this is the one, I guess I would parlay this conversation into is like, if you think you're going to start this business and sit in your house and send out marketing to people and just make phone calls and never have to actually communicate with people like at a network level, you're probably not going to make it in this business. Like this is this is a team sport. This isn't a sit in your office type thing and just be a nerd on data and marketing, because that doesn't get you anywhere. Doesn't matter how many cool systems you build around this business, how many cool spreadsheets you have. It's that personal brand via your network that is where you're going to monetize this business.
Here's a fun fact. 100%. My revenue per deal between 4 different channels, SMS, direct mail, cold calling, and like I'll count referral in there. Referral is my second highest revenue per deal out of those 4 channels.
Surprised by that. Yeah.
That's amazing. I believe
Makes sense. I mean, we got a fat deal off a referral that Dan got earlier this year.
Which one was
like
that?
40 grand. That one that was a friend of a friend or something.
Oh yes.
Yeah. I don't want to put too much on it out there. Yeah, I mean, totally right. And then in terms of like what a loss leader could potentially be, if you're trying to sort of like comprehend that as a wholesaler, I looked, Dan, at the very first deal that we sold to these guys that really kind of beat us up on our wholesale fee. And I wouldn't even necessarily say it was a loss because technically we made money, even though we're still in the red for the business. But we could have sold it to so much more to somebody else. But instead, we built good graces with the top buyer in our market, and we sold them dozens and dozens of deals and made hundreds of thousands of dollars off of them over the following years because we had that respect, we had that connection, that relationship, and we gave them a deal that they crushed it on their first one. Sure, we were ignorant to it, but hey, it paid out over the long run. Right?
Well, and I think too, with that being said, is there's something to be said about giving people or selling people a good deal. Don't short yourself on profits, but don't also be that guy that's pushing everything. You're like, well, I think the ARV is 5% over what it is. I think the rehab budget is 10% below what you advertise it is, and you know what I mean? Because every deal has a buyer, and you will find people. We have a person in Spokane that this is how they operate, and they do very well. But everybody that buys a deal from them recently doesn't do well. They
probably
lose
doesn't
money
end up buying a second deal from them.
And there's a reason why they're almost always newbies that go to their meetup and learn how to do this, and then decide that they're going to buy a deal from this person. There's a lot of trust and rapport built, and then they lose money on it. It's like there's something to be said about the longevity and staying power of your business by selling people good, solid deals that will, because if they win, they're going to come buy another one from you.
And you have if you have a good buyer, and let's say it's already, you've got it signed up, and then someone else comes in and says, I'll give you $5,000 more. Don't chase the $5,000.
No.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Don't get greedy. Just sell your guy, and there'll be plenty more efficiency. Now, if he comes in and says, I'm going to offer you $25,000 more, then maybe have that discussion.
Exactly. Then you go to your buyer and you're like, bro, this is 20. They're like, yeah, $25,000. Sell it to that guy.
Honestly, here's a great way to approach a situation. You go back to your buyer and say, hey, I know you're really going to buy this deal. I had a guy that offered me this much more. If I give you $10,000, will you walk away? He'll probably do it. Honestly.
Yeah.
If you already have some net
coming out on top.
Yeah, exactly.
I would do that.
I would take that
like
deal all day
really
long.
Sick deal. Someone's like, hey, I'll give you $10,000 check if you just move away from it. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Sounds fun.
Absolutely.
But, cool. So to answer your question, Dylan, we kind of went all over it.
No, it did. I think that was an overall good discussion about everything. And I think, tying it all together, it's hard for a lot of the business acumen to get tied back to this business. And I think we try to do a good job of that. So,
yeah. Well, it's funny. The more that I would say, started to learn about basic business, the more I've realized how much it actually does apply to real estate, even though it feels like it doesn't a lot of the time. especially because like our transaction cycle is so long. And the way that it works is we're really just brokering both sides, right? And there's a lot of different pieces to it. But at its core, real estate is just like any other business, right? It's marketing, there's sales, there's operations. That's kind of it. Like if you don't have those things, you can't have any business, regardless of what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So
simple but not easy.
Yeah, it's definitely simple but not easy. Cool. All right. Well, guys, thanks for listening to us today. Hopefully you got some value out of that. You should go to collectingkeys.com/academy. We just launched this new thing. It is basically like our course that used to be behind the multiple $1,000 paywall at scale that you can now get for just a couple $100. collectingkeys.com/scale. We have a Facebook group. We have like 60 something videos that goes through all of the BS about how we build our business every step of the way, from marketing, sales, disposition, everything else. And then we will be doing somewhat regular calls, probably about twice a month over there as well. So you can connect with me, Dan, and maybe Dylan a time or two to just like get some help and help you get started in your business. And then once you do that and you start crushing it and you decide that you really want to take it to the next level, then we can decide if scale makes sense for you. But collectingkeys.com/academy, check that out. And we appreciate you guys checking it out. So thanks, everybody. See you later.
See ya.